Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend and Publish. Today, when I went to my daily writing session, I felt a little bit paralyzed by all the things I could be working on in my manuscript. And I really had two different types of tasks I could have been working on. They're about equally important, and they both were something that kind of needed for me to do. I needed to do it before I could get to the next step. And for me, I just had a really tough time deciding between all of the possibilities, but knowing that these two were important. And I started thinking about standard parenting advice that goes for when you're trying to get your toddlers or your children dressed in the morning. You give them a choice of two options. You say, do you want to wear the jeans today, or do you want to wear the sweatpants? Do you want to wear the red shirt or the orange one? And you pretty much leave it where there's just two choices, and then one of those has to be chosen and the path forward is clear. And so I started thinking about that today when I wasn't sure what I was going to work on for writing, and I decided to give myself a choice. I've mentioned several times I use Penzu, the online writing journal. I know I've talked about it in many, many episodes, but I thought I would share a screen of just what I ended up doing when I was giving myself a choice today. And so what I did, because I'm kind of at a stage in a very large writing project that there's some smaller things that need to be done and then a couple of really big conceptual pieces. And I'm pretty much down to two big conceptual pieces and then a couple of little ones. And so what I decided to do was just brainstorm where I was in the writing project right now and just list my writing choices for the day. So these are not the same as, say, project stages that I'm tracking in Asana or specific tasks that have to be done, but basically some choices about what to do in the 2 hours of writing time I had available. So as I saw it, I really had four things that could have been done that would have equally moved the needle for where I wanted to go. Two of them probably more so than others. So one of which is that I had printed out a paper copy of my chapter 6, and I had already made some edits on the first half of chapter 6 on the paper copy. So I had my old school pen, I had the printed copy and then just started crossing stuff out, writing notes, etc. So I had all of those notes already written on the first half of the printed chapter 6. So one of my tasks was to enter in paper edits of chapter 6, right? I call them paper edits if I've got stuff on paper that I've made edits and I need to enter it into the digital draft, right? So another thing I could have done was done paper edits on the second half of chapter 6, meaning I still had the big printed copy of chapter 6 and I just pick up where I left off and kept paper editing all the way to the end, meaning I was reading all the pages, I was crossing out things that didn't work, I was, making arrows between sections, circling typos, that kind of thing. But I also had chapter 5 as a chapter that is the last chapter that I have not fully read through and done a really good revision on. So I still had that to do. And then I know throughout the whole document, I have lots of places where I updated some information, and in parentheses, I've added cite, like CITE, and fill those in. I can see from looking at this list, and for those of you that heard me just verbally describe it, you don't need to see what I'm sharing on the screen, but I could see from this list that finding the word cite in, just using a search and find in Microsoft Word to find CITE in all caps, while, that would be a good use of 2 hours because I definitely need to do it, that's probably not my highest level thinking. And so I ended up really with three choices. And I decided it's probably better to decide if I'm going to work on my paper edits and enter them in for the first half, or do the paper edits on the second half and get my pen and paper out or a pen out and start reading that second half. So, in this case, I actually ended up having three choices to make. But once I got to that point, it was pretty easy for me to see what made logical sense. And so what I decided made logical sense for me was to enter in the first round of edits on paper into the digital draft of chapter 6 before moving on to the second round. And why I decided to do that is because some of the things that I was working on in the paper edit might change the meaning of what happens in the second part of chapter 6. But also, just from a practical standpoint, I was carrying around a 50-ish page printed out chapter in my laptop bag, and I really wanted to lose 25 pages. So that was the motivating factor for me to end up choosing that first task. But what really helped me in this case, and where I think this podcast is going, is that sometimes we have multiple choices of what we could actually work on in any given moment. And for me, it helped me to just write out what my choices were and then look at it as though it was a toddler's clothing decision. Is it the red shirt? Is it the yellow shirt? Is it, rain boots today or tennis shoes? And, and then just forcing it into this lens where deciding on the thing to work on in the moment when looking at all the possibilities becomes a little bit helpful. So the next time that you're trying to decide what it is that you can work on, it might help to just write out a couple of writing choices in an actual list. For me, it was very easy then to see, well, one of these things, which was finding all the spots where I wrote cite and filling those in, was not like the other three. The other three were more, for whatever reason, they required more brain work, because essentially they all required reading and they all required me deciding what comments and revision notes and things to make. The first one about entering in the revision notes, this is a step that happened after I already had made those paper edits. So it's true, it was a little bit different, but in the course of entering in those paper edits, as what happens with a lot of us that do this, where you print out a draft, you mark all over it, and then you start entering in your changes. A lot of times you're still revising the text as you go because you realize, oh, well, this one change triggered another change. So I knew that all three of the things that were on my list that were more substantial all required the same kind of reading and editing. The one difference, though, and why I ultimately went with entering in those paper edits into my chapter 6, in addition to wanting to lose carrying around 25 printed pieces of paper that I could throw in the recycling bin, one of the other things that was sort of the winning factor to me there is that I knew exactly what to do. So this might be another thing to help with choice and decision making. So for example, I could go right to open my digital document of chapter 6, open it up, go to page 260 or whatever page it was, and then immediately start looking at the paper draft with the cross outs and all that kind of stuff, and go and enter all of those changes one by one. So for me, that's what ultimately won the day, because I knew exactly what to do next. But this decision-making process and thinking through all the tasks that we have when we do writing sessions is a natural part of sort of deciding, what does it mean for me to be writing right now? What is the thing that has to be worked on? It's all part of academic prioritization and thinking through where scholarly projects are at the current moment and where I am as a writer. So I think the more that we listen to that decision-making process and think about giving yourself a choice with writing when you're a little bit paralyzed by all the options, that might be one way to sort of work through that. I could see this even being a strategy really useful for working through a writing block where it's more, you're just overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that you have to do. So I hope this strategy gave you some food for thought. And I encourage you to check out some of our other episodes, including episodes that talk about the different writing blocks. I'll link to those in the show notes, because some of these choices that you need to make sometimes are about how to do something, not exactly what to do. So I encourage you to check out those episodes. I'll link to those in the show notes, and happy writing.